Part 2, Game 5. Roy Lopez, St. Petersburg, 1914. White, Dr. E. Lasker. Black, J.R. Capablanca. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop B5, A6, Bishop takes C6. The object of this move is to bring about speedily a middle game without queens, in which white has 4 pawns to 3 on the king side, while black's superiority of pawns on the other side is somewhat balanced by the fact that one of black's pawns is doubled. On the other hand, black has the advantage of remaining with 2 bishops while white only has 1. D takes C6, D4, E takes D4, Queen takes D4, Queen takes D4, Knight takes D4, Bishop D6. Black's idea is to castle on the king's side. His reason is that the king ought to remain on the weaker side to oppose later the advance of white's pawns. Theoretically, there is very much to be said in favor of this reasoning, but whether in practice that would be the best system would be rather difficult to prove. The student should notice that if now all the pieces were exchanged, white would practically be a pawn ahead, and would therefore have a 1 ending. Knight C3, Knight E7. A perfectly sound form of development. In any other form adopted, the black knight could not be developed either as quickly or as well. E7 is the natural position for the black knight in this variation, in order not to obstruct black's pawns, and also, in some eventualities, in order to go to G6. There is also the possibility of its going to D4 via C6 after C6 to C5. Castles, castles, F4. This move I considered weak at the time, and I do still. It leaves the E pawn weak unless it advances to E5, and it also makes it possible for black to pin the knight by Bishop C5. Rook E8. Best. It threatens Bishop C5, Bishop E3, Knight D5. It also prevents Bishop E3 because of Knight D5 or Knight F5. Knight B3, F6. Preparatory to B7 to B6, followed by C6 to C5 and Bishop B7, in conjunction with Knight G6, which would put white in great difficulties to meet the combined attack against the 2 center pawns. F5. It has been wrongly claimed that this wins the game, but I would like nothing better than to have such a position again. It required several mistakes on my part finally to obtain a lost position. B6, Bishop F4, Bishop B7. Played against my better judgment. The right move, of course, was Bishop takes F4. Dr. Lasker gives the following variation. Rook takes F4, C5, Rook D1, Bishop B7, Rook F2, Rook A D8, Rook takes D8, Rook takes D8, Rook D2, Rook takes D2, Knight takes D2, and he claims that white has the best of it. But as Nimzovich pointed out immediately after the game, Rook A D8 given in Dr. Lasker's variation is not the best. If Rook A C8 great move, then white will have a great difficulty in drawing the game, since there is no good way to stop black from playing Knight C6, followed by Knight E5, threatening Knight C4. And should white attempt to meet this maneuver by withdrawing the Knight B3, then the black knight can go to D4, and the white pawn at E4 will be the object of the attack. Taking Dr. Lasker's variation, however, whatever advantage there might be disappears at once if black plays Knight C6, threatening knight b4, and also knight d4, neither of which can be stopped. If white answers knight d5, knight d4, for black will at least draw. In fact, after knight c6, black threatens so many things that it is difficult to see how white can prevent the loss of one or more pawns. Bishop takes d6, c takes d6, knight d4. It is curious but true fact that I did not see this move when I played bishop b7. Otherwise, I would have played the right move, bishop takes f4, rook a, d8. The game is yet far from lost, as against the entry of the knight, black can later on play c6 to c5, followed by d6 to d5. Knight e6, rook d7, rook a, d1. I now was on the point of playing c5 to be followed by d6 to d5, which I thought would give me a draw, but suddenly I became ambitious and thought that I could play the text move, knight c8, and later on sacrifice the exchange for the knight at e6, winning a pawn for it and leaving white's e-pawn still weaker. I intended to carry this plan either before or after playing g7 to g5, as the circumstances demanded. Now let us analyze. c5. If knight d5, then bishop takes d5, e takes d5, b5, and a careful analysis will show that black has nothing to fear. Black's plan in this case would be to work his knight around to e5 via c8, b6, and c4 or d7. Again, c5, rook f2, d5, e takes d5, bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, best, since if rook f d2, bishop takes e6 gives black the advantage. Rook takes d5, rook takes d5, knight takes d5, and there is no good reason why black should lose. Knight c8, rook f2, b5, rook f d2, rook d e7, b4, king f7, a3, bishop a8. Once more changing my plan, and this time without any good reason. Had I now played rook takes e6, f takes e6 check, rook takes e6, as I intended to do when I went back with the knight to c8, I doubt very much if white would have been able to win the game. At least it would have been extremely difficult. King f2, rook a7, g4, h6, rook d3, a5, h4, a takes b4, a takes b4, rook a e7. This, of course, has no object now. Black, with a bad game, flounders around for a move. It would have been better to play rook a3 to keep the open file and at the same time to threaten to come out with the knight at b6 and c4. King f3, rook g8, king f4, g6. Again, bad. White's last two moves were weak, since the white king does nothing here. He should have played his rook to g3 on the 27th move. Black now should have played g5 check. After missing this chance, white has it all his own way and finishes the game most accurately, and black becomes more helpless with each move. The game needs no further comment, excepting that my play throughout was of an altogether irresolute character. When a plan is made, it must be carried out if at all possible. Regarding the play of white, I consider his 10th and 12th moves were very weak. He played well after that up to the 27th move, which was bad, as well as his 28th move. The rest of his play was good, Probably perfect. Rook g3, g5 check, king f3, knight b6, h takes g5, h takes g5, rook h3, rook d7, king g3, great move, king e8, rook d h1, bishop b7, e5, d takes e5, knight e4, knight d5, knight 6 c5, bishop c8, knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, rook h7, rook f8, rook a1, king d8, rook a8 check, bishop c8, knight c5, resigns.